Let us pray. In the name of the one who creates, redeems, and who sustains us. Amen. It's a story with plenty of twists and turns, a story of battle, of loyalty, of betrayal, a story with plenty of action both on and off the battlefield, but mostly it's a story about power and privilege and how it's misused, and the chain of events that will lead to adultery, to a cover-up, and to a death. It's the story of King David, who, in the time that kings usually went to war, stays home and sends others off to fight his battles for him. The story of David enjoying the privileges that only a king can, who, while relaxing in the palace far from battle, strolling on his rooftop, notices a beautiful woman who's quietly getting on with her ablutions one evening. David likes what he sees. And not being occupied by the demands of battle, he makes a few calls. He finds out who the woman is. He discovers that the husband is away fighting on his behalf, a loyal soldier. So David sends his men to bring her to the palace. David is an absolute monarch, and he holds the power of life and death in his hands. He can have anything he wants, and what he wants is Bathsheba. Bathsheba, when requested to come to the palace, does so, for after all, who can refuse a king? And if she did refuse, what might the implications be for her and for her husband, who's away fighting at the front? David misuses his power and his privilege. Later, after having slept together, Bathsheba discovers that she's pregnant. And again, David misuses his power and his privilege in order to try and effect a cover-up. He sends for Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, on the pretense of wanting to hear how the campaign is going. They talk for a while, and after this, he gives Uriah a gift and he bids him to go and enjoy the comforts of home. But Uriah is a man of scruples and of integrity, a man who feels that, well, he shouldn't be enjoying himself while his comrades are away at the front, camping in open fields. So instead, he sleeps outside by the entrance of the palace. The next morning, when David hears of this, he invites Uriah into the palace and plies him with food and drink for the day. He tries to get him drunk, and then he tries to encourage him to go back home to Bathsheba. It doesn't work. Uriah once again sleeps outside the entrance of the palace. And so the next morning, before sending him back to war, David gives Uriah a letter for Joab, who's the commander of David's army. In the letter, David instructs Joab to put Uriah into the thick of the battle and then to withdraw, effectively leaving Uriah unprotected. And so in that time, he will be killed. David's written Uriah a death sentence. And so with his message, off goes Uriah. Loyal Uriah heads back again to fight David's battle, and he's killed. After a suitable period of mourning, David brings Bathsheba to the palace. She becomes his wife. They have a son, and the son dies. And in the midst of his grief, David has a moment of clarity, and he's overcome with guilt and remorse. David, the favored of God, has messed up big time. And this story, so full of twists and turns and of abuse of power and privilege, this story is the background to Psalm 51. Psalm 51 is a cry of confession to God. God who already knows what David has done. David reflects on what he's done and of the effects of his actions. So focused upon himself and his power and his wants, David has forgotten that the power of the king is found within service to God and within service to the people. And both God and the people had been neglected. And having put God to one side, David makes a series of bad choices. In his cry of confession, David talks of needing to be washed clean. He feels tainted. He feels impure, dirty. He speaks of feeling broken and of his need for restoration. God, blot out my transgressions, he cries, and then let me sing your praises once more. David's prayer of confession shows him weighed down by the enormity of what he's done and also of who he's become. He almost doesn't recognize himself. And it also shows us that even having done what he's done, David still knows that God is merciful. Yes, actions have consequences, and David's actions will have all sorts of consequences for the rest of his life. But even so, he accepts that. For the prayer of confession is the taking of responsibility for our actions. It's saying to God, I messed up. It's saying to God, I'm sorry. It's saying to God, help me be better. Help me be the person you created me to be. It's saying to God, I trust in your loving kindness and in the wideness of your mercy. In worship, we begin with adoration. We begin with adoration of the one who we worship. We find their perfection and loveliness and beauty. And as we dwell on God who is good, we see ourselves and discover often that, well, we're not perfect, that at times we're far from lovely and loving and good. We see in God's perfection our own brokenness and imperfection. And so with David, we cry to God and we ask for mercy, finding in God one who actively seeks us out as a shepherd to a lost sheep. We find in God through the prayer of confession, mercy, forgiveness, restoration, and an infinite number of opportunities to turn to the one who knows us and who loves us more than at times we know and love ourselves. Our story may not be David's story, but in each of our stories, there is one who is always ready to welcome us and to forgive us and to take away the guilt that weighs us down so that we can stand straight and tall and see the sky once more. Confession truly is good for the soul. And as we turn to God in the prayer of confession, so God rejoices, and the great heavenly choir of angels sings for joy. Amen. Time now for a little space for reflection as we listen to an instrumental of that beautiful confessional hymn, Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. And through that music, we'll also enjoy some simple and yet effective artwork. So let's spend some time now meditating on the words of the hymn and think of the God who does indeed forgive our foolish ways.